Hello, everyone. Welcome to Our World Today, the Unionist perspective, where we talk about the news of the week and discuss them with our point of view. So we have a few topics that we want to talk about today. Nadia, would you like to introduce them?
Good evening. Yes, we are going to start off with the 80-year cycle history turning theory. And Sage will give us a little details on each of the little patterns that the book has mentioned. Then we're going to speak about Sam Altman, the CEO of AI Open, being fired. And then from there, we're going to transition into the Israel-Hamas truce.
Oh, thank you so much. So basically, the 80-year cycle of history is something that has been around for a while. Something that was created by Strauss Howe or Strauss Howe. Strauss Howe, I think. And yeah, Sage is going to introduce and explain that concept, and I think we can discuss it afterwards.
Yeah, it's from this book called, I think the book's called The Fourth Turning, but I think it's like William Strauss and Neil Howe are their names, two American authors. And they basically talk about, like, they say in world history, but especially in like Anglo-American history, it goes through these cycles that are 80 or 90, maybe 100 years. And so every quarter of the cycle would be like 20 to 25 years, more or less. And it's not like strict or anything or mathematical. It's just this like trend of cycles in history that they're talking about. And so they are basically saying that history is cyclical, and because the history is cyclical, every part of the cycle serves a certain purpose to like our progress, and that we shouldn't get too upset about what's happening right now, which is like they define it as like it's a crisis period. So they have these four different like turnings, the four turnings of every cycle. Sometimes they call it like a saeculum or a cyculum, from like, this Latin term, like the ancients viewed history this way. So they're just kind of borrowing that concept from them and like modernizing it basically. And so taking it to the current context, basically from the end of World War II, like 1946, until like about 1963 for the US. This is kind of focused on the US, although they seem to say it's international. From the end of World War II to when John F. Kennedy was assassinated in the US is kind of known as like a high. That's the term that they use for it. So like this big boom period where there's a lot of conformity, there's a lot of trust in government and institutions, there's a very can-do attitude, lots of positivity, lots of growth in whatever form it might present itself in. Post-World War II for the US, it was a huge boom. The baby boomers were born in that period. They're called the boomers because there's a big population boom after the war, because prosperity like skyrocketed once the world order was like more secure, like secure international trade was created, big wartime boost to the US economy, huge investment in Western Europe and everything like that. But like Nadia's messaging our group, I think what she's referring to by saying wage gap is like, it's not always a boom for everybody. Is that what you're referring to? Like how there's like, for marginalized people, a high can often be like not a good time. Is that what you're referring to?
Oh, there was an equalization of wage gap, but you're also right. There wasn't a good time for many other people. as well.
Yeah, I found that really interesting, especially with the unionism's perspective, because this cycle is very egoic. It's very ego-based, where one person has to lose for another person to gain. And it's always a double-edged sword. So a boom for some people equals lots of marginalization for other people, right? And so, but that was also back in the day when, you know, the father in the family could like work at a gas station or a factory and buy the family a house, and the mother could stay home and like fulfill her stereotypical gender role or do what she wanted. Maybe she wanted to stay home, okay? That wouldn't be bad. But so that boom is seen as like, yes, this big period of like conformity and everything's great, but there's also these marginalized people. The awakening period is after that. So like 1963 to like 1981, or maybe 84, they vary, is this awakening period where all these marginalized groups and people who were encouraged to be like, shut up, everything's good, why are you complaining? You know, the kids who were raised during that period start to rebel, and they're like, wait a minute, like all of this social conformity isn't as good as we thought. And that's what we got in the 60s and the early 70s with hippies. And the boomer children were starting to like come of age or be teenagers, and they're like, yeah, like, you know, rise up against the man and stuff, and let's look at Eastern spirituality and all of that. And yes, the Vietnam War was happening. The government was really, in some ways, trying to clamp down on all the social protests, like racial justice, gay rights, women's liberation. The government was trying to kind of like push back against that still. And then the fallout from all of that, from the awakening, is this period called the unraveling, which they say like 1981, 1984 till maybe about the late 90s, maybe 2004. And that would be a period where individualism becomes really entrenched, trust in government institutions becomes really low, and the previous order kind of just like keeps unraveling. And yeah, and we saw that with like mainly the increase in like terrorism and like instability around the world on smaller scales, especially with the 9/11 attacks, basically. And then the fourth turning in their terminology is basically the crisis since like 2008 with the financial crisis. And that's kind of when all the systems, which were probably partly not built on a good foundation, like it was probably built on sand, comes crashing down. And we saw that with the financial system, which is still happening, kind of where people are like speculating and making bad bets economically, and stuff is becoming really imbalanced in the economy. And then the crisis is like the reckoning period of all of that, basically. And so in the previous 80-year cycle, you saw that with imperialism, like European countries and the US were part of this imperial system that was like colonizing Africa, and like they were competing a lot, and there was so much social tension and huge inequality, just like now, which culminated in people who got too high off of their financial gains, causing the stock market collapse, the Great Depression. You know, that kind of leads to World War II, when Hitler gets support from the Germans. And then World War II is like the culmination of the crisis. And so now we're supposedly like also in a crisis period, I guess, with like the Ukraine war, the tension with China and Taiwan, rising dictatorship, and but yeah, there's COVID. What else is going? And just like they're talking about like the financial crisis being like home ownership really low, marriage low, divorce rate high. What's the other thing? Yeah, just everyone complaining about how much stuff costs, you know, and there is like a big financial crisis, like people feeling like things aren't going to be as good as they used to. So that's basically the outline of what they're saying, and they're saying it's kind of cyclical. And after this, we're all going to like resolve it somehow and have another high period. But because this is based partly on ego, this like rise and fall is like, you shouldn't like pin your hopes and dreams to like a rise and fall. It should be this constant growth and building. And I feel like ultimately we will transcend that. But for the time being, like this book is saying, like, just be aware that like history is cyclical. Yeah. So
Yeah, I feel like the cycles are definitely indicative of choice, you know, like how we know that that creates our reality. And I feel like to break like the cycle, you know, especially because we know it's based on ego, like it would have to be a fundamental change, right? Like a fundamental change in choice, I feel, to really change these patterns that we see.
yeah.
Even though it is based on ego, I kind of understand how this would be a cycle, because like, do you remember when we started this discussion, we talked about how some of the generational trauma and patterns of end of World War II, beginning of Cold War were still playing out in a sense. And I guess like or maybe it is based on ego, because like it feels like there was a period of high where we could ignore that this was going on, and it was kind of stuffed down, but it was still there, and people were like, oh my gosh, it is still there, and we need to look at it, and we need to heal it, and yeah, basically people are still in that phase, and I guess humanity is still in that phase where we need to heal stuff, and you know, in terms of humanity and history, like 100 years is not that long. Yes, it's a human life, but on the scale of having billions of people living on Earth and having to have a consensus of everyone changing and healing, I think probably 100 years is not that long for most people. And I think in that sense, like I kind of get why it would be cyclical, because our patterns too as individuals are cyclical, right? Like you come back to this thing, and you felt like you had advanced, and you feel like you were in deep crap all over again, but then you realize that it's a different layer, and it's a different thing, and you're actually advancing, but patterns are like this, you know, and they're going up, but in that sense. And so you're building that foundation, yes, so you're constantly rising, but sometimes it feels like a big upheaval. And you know, on the scale of Earth, that having 8 billion people on the planet, I would say the upheaval is probably going to be way deep and feel like everything is going to shit in some ways. Most like at the beginning of a spiritual journey, we're like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm going to die today, and you don't actually die, you know.
I think
So yeah, that's my feeling on it.
I wanna mention too what you said, Irene, about how life is a cycle and we can spiral upward, going through layer after layer of lessons. We can spiral down, but you hopefully catch yourself and you don't do that, or maybe spiral the same. I don't know. I don't know what the world is doing, but it's spiraling some way. But Kristen was saying how it's interesting that these cycles are about the term of a human lifespan, because it kind of is reflective of how people can keep reincarnating. if you believe in reincarnation, which we do. And they would keep coming back and have to look at the same lessons again.
Right.
So their soul would keep calling in the same lessons, or maybe they're kind of offset a little bit. And yeah, it's kind of how we spiral up, or we just keep going, or and in the book they were saying, isn't it like weird how every time we're in another crisis, a lot of the people who lived through the previous crisis are dead now. So there's no one who remembers like quite how to handle a crisis, right? And it's like, well, yes, but also no, because we have like little mini crises periods throughout. And also, like we're saying, like you experienced that probably previously in previous lifetimes. So we're kind of all, we repeat lessons until we learn them. I thought that was cool.
Yeah. Also, we're one, so obviously there's something where we always get a lesson in terms of like on a global scale of how to handle that crisis, even though we didn't live through it, whether in this life or in another. So yeah, I think we cannot forget that we're actually one. And I think in these times of like complicated history and conflicts and horrible things happening, I think it's easy to forget how that oneness actually plays out, but it is still there, and I think it's nice to also remind ourselves of that like cycles are not always like fourth turning point, and it feels like the end of the world and we're going to have a world war, and it's like apocalypse and everyone is feeling bad. There's also a good thing about like remembering that actually we're humans and we need each other, So yeah. Nadia, what did you want to say?
Yeah, that was a great point. And you guys were talking about the cycle, and I was also thinking about that too, of how the earth revolves around a cycle. And as far as I know, it is completely like in rotation and continuously going upward. So, regardless of how many cycles we do, it is always going upward. So, I feel that for ourselves too and humanity. The challenges we may have had 200 years, yeah, that was a point of crisis, but it's still a different type of challenge. And the story that we're going to talk about next about AI was not something that was there 200 years ago. You have a whole different kind of perspective and new type of world that we're going through this crisis with. So that's very interesting to see. And I also like the idea of as we're going around in a circle, we can always look at the other side of that circle, like whether we just passed it or like we're about to go on it, and see from like our past and that other point of how these cyclic patterns evolve and how we evolve. And like you said, we are one. So it is beautiful to see no matter how many lifetimes we live here, we're all continuously purifying our soul, continuously upward into evolving and ascending.
Yeah, that's super interesting what you're saying. And it's true that we can always look back at our week, our month, our year, or at history, at the last century or millennia, to be able to understand humanity and to understand ourselves truly. And yeah, I think it's pretty nice to always have that tool around and have that knowledge around, have people's memories or things captured in order to like kind of understand ourselves. But I want to ask you guys, like, if we're in the fourth turning point, like, what do you feel humanity is going through right now? Do you feel like it's pretty positive, negative, a little bit of both? Do you think it's complete? We're going haywire and we're going to World War III, like a lot of people think, or What's your feeling on it?
I definitely think we're going through upheaval. And I feel like COVID was like a sign of the core of it, of really having to sit down and reflect on ourselves. Like the last 60 years, I don't think humanity really got a chance to reflect on themselves as much as we're doing right now. That's just how I'm feeling about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very juicy discussion. I also have some questions for you guys.
I
Yeah,
feel
I
like
feel. Oh, go ahead, Cindy.
no, it's okay. Oh. Oh, no, I feel like I don't think it's negative either. And I feel like this crisis period, like at least from the point of view of US history and European history too, it's nowhere near as rough as the previous two. Like, like when you think of like Europe in like the 1840s, 1850s, tons of revolutions. Like, are we going to have absolute monarchy, or are we going to have like some form of democracy? Was a huge question in Europe then. Now it's like not like that at all. Like the last crisis was the Great Depression and World War II. Like I feel like now we're getting like softer versions of this because maybe as a world, like we're learning stuff. Perhaps, I don't know. Because like the 2008 financial crisis was definitely bad, but it was no Great Depression. And yeah, it sucks that like a lot of people our age like can't afford a home depending on where they want to live and everything. And like our economy's like crazy and out of whack and everything. And yes, there's the Ukraine war, but that's no World War III, right? And I feel like we've chosen to not go down that route again. So I feel like it is positive, but yeah, I'm not sure like how we're gonna resolve some of the challenges here, but we don't have to like know exactly. I don't know. Yeah. So
I feel like it feels like a test of faith too, because it's like a big. I feel like it's a big upheaval of fear. Like there's a lot of things that can seem scary, right, or feel that way, but it's like where are you gonna put your energy into? Are you gonna go deeper into love and faith in that, like you have, like no matter what, you have love and support for you, or are you gonna like kind of just feed the fear, you know?
yeah, I was thinking about like what do people do during this crisis? And right when I did that on the radio in the car, a song came on about like having faith and embracing that change is a good thing. So I feel like that might be the message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I get you guys. I think maybe probably there's a lot of like feeding the fear happening, at least in Western countries. I think depending on the individual choices of each country, they're going to go through this crisis era in. Oh, can you hear me? Can you see me? Hello? Okay. You look frozen to me, so maybe I thought maybe my internet had cut off. But like depending on the country that you're going to be in and depending on the choices of that country, you're probably going to live that crisis era in a very different way. And I think Western countries are pretty okay. Went through like a lot of lessons and a lot of upheaval already, but there is also a lot of feeding the fear. And that's why we mustn't feed the fear in terms of politics and things like that. And that's why, maybe choosing like extremist route when we actually can choose something that it's not perfect, but a stable rot is probably going to make us go back into a downward cycle, which is not what we want to do. So like we observe people in our countries, we're grateful to have countries that are like pretty stable, even if it's not perfect. And we observe people feeling the fear, but in hopes that they're not going to feel the fear too much, that we're going to go back in a downward cycle. And I'm choosing to always go upward, even though it's difficult. And I think that's key, and that's really important to understand for even some of non-Western countries, to be honest. I think yeah, we've went past a certain point in history for sure. And yeah, I was thinking of something else, but I forgot completely, so maybe it'll come back to me later. So, questions, Nadia?
Yeah, I feel like we're all from the unraveling stage, right? Of getting born at that era. Like, how does that feel for you? And knowing what we've been through and what we continue to go through, I kind of identify with like this hero's journey with myself. And how do you guys feel about this hero's journey of like keeping the faith and making sure that we stand by God and stand our ground of our divinity?
Well, pretty big question, yeah. Well, I was born into a place where we were like not political enough to be in a certain political party, which I am grateful for, but always on the cusp of like being open to the world and being open to other cultures and feeding ourselves of what people would say, do, or think all around the world. And I was always in that stage of like, can people just see that they're agreeing on the same things, but like they're just wanting to argue, and it's making the other party tense, and the conflict is about miscommunication. And that's funny because this discussion and the discussions on like Israel and Hamas are like full circle for me, because I would get probably like mocked or like not really listened to, or like people would say, ha ha ha, so you're in the center of the political spectrum, which like not necessarily, but like you're at the center of a political spectrum, and that's lame. That means that you have no ideas, because for some people, like being a centrist is not having any ideas, basically. Um, and I guess you kind of lose faith sometimes when you see the crisis, when you don't have a really like strong backbone and foundation. And I think this work is like a journey of like emotional reconstruction for me, but also for like the things that I believed in as a child. And that's not just like love and perfect partners, that's also like a very stable, like normal, global way of living, for the world. And the fact that it's accepted that, hey, we can talk about both sides and think that both sides have like reasons, is something that feels very good to me. And I think something that I want to share with people. And so I don't know quite sure if it's a hero's journey, but it does feel like coming back to what you believe in, which is kind of like cinematic in a way, but it's like the spiritual path. It's our life. And it's pretty nice that it's our life. Sage.
Yeah, I do feel that like, yeah, I feel, a lot of people in this community are too also millennials, including Jeff and Shaleia. They're also millennials, but not everybody in this community is. But most of them are, because of like the timing, like a lot of people who are on their twin flame journey. Well, there's a lot of people who are like more in midlife and stuff too, and there's plenty of people like that too, but a lot of them are about our age, like they might be in like their 20s or 30s, and maybe like they're still single or something, or maybe they had a relationship but it didn't work out, or they're not happy in it and they want to change it. And a lot of people who are open to that are like about this age, and like it does make sense, because like, yeah, it feels, since we grew up in a time, like for me, like I don't know about you guys, but my childhood really reflected the patterns that those guys were talking about in their book, because usually kids who grow up in like a third turning or like the unraveling stage, their parents are more protective of them because people are seeing things as like going down. You hear things about like, oh, things aren't going to be, they may not be as good as they were for us back then, and your parents were raised more as like with a lot more freedom and less oversight, like more latchkey kind of kids. And they talk about that and how they're tougher, but then they're also overprotective of you. And also I had growing up too, the huge feeling of like individualism and like focusing on your own achievements, and very, very little sense of any sort of like collective vision or strong political will. And yeah, I feel that, but I feel like living in those kinds of conditions, like not growing up in a period of a lot of crisis to where you're like shell shocked, but like growing up in a period where like you can see like some cracks forming in society more easily. And you're more likely to think and be like, what do we really want? Like, what do I really want for myself? What do we really want for society? And yeah, you see that in a lot of people our age. More people are like, I don't know, like for example, like coming out as, for example, as trans or gay or LGBTQ, like that was a big part of Isaiah's and my journey. And yeah, it's just like a bigger thing for us. Although there were always path-breaking people in any generation at any time. It's just, they may not have been as open, or maybe they were, so I feel like that's cool. And I see the pattern in our lives. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I feel this feeling of like strength, and like it's just about really coming back to like what you really believe in and standing up for that. And yeah, it feels like, yeah, just like standing by that no matter what.
Yeah, I agree. It's true that there's a feeling that more people of our generations have that sense of like whatever they're choosing, right? That they're going to be like unapologetically themselves no matter what, and it's pretty cool. Yeah.
And I think that's a great transition to our AI story of really getting to know yourself and getting to know both the abundance of information and the discernment of misinformation. And we're in that era where we are really going into a revolutionary time when it comes to technology. So,
For sure. So we're talking about AI today, but it's more of a human story, in a sense, because last week, I think, Sam Altman, who is the co-founder of OpenAI, and so founded ChatGPT and DALL-E, which are doing really, really good right now, got fired under weird circumstances. I didn't find the information at first, I think because a lot of like media sources were probably going for more dramatic routes of like there's no explanation to it and stuff, and board members are rebelling against this decision, and want to quit and go to Microsoft, and Microsoft has promised to like hire them on the, instantly if they quit. And so I was like, what is happening? And it feels like that decision was hurting a whole company and a whole like progression of technology. And then I found finally today that they fired him over like him not being open in his communication. And I think maybe it happened like once, or I don't know, I'm not sure. But like that one or two band members regretted that decision and felt like it was just a clown show or a shit show right now. And it felt like it was more about interest and money than actually saving the company, because it felt like the company was going down and Microsoft was going to get all the technological progress that they were going about. And like basically a lot of people rely on ChatGPT and DALL-E today to do their stuff. I know like I see DALL-E art everywhere and super beautiful, and I think a lot of people can express their creativity more with the instrument of that or go into new pathways. And this decision almost like hurt a lot of people in business, not just Sam Altman. And so I'm thinking that maybe this is a lesson in saying like, hey, your decision can be about one person outside of you, but if you're trying to make it about one person outside of you instead of making it about you and what feels good inside of you, you're probably going to hurt a lot of people. And obviously we don't have the whole story, but like one or two people were proposed to be new CEOs, like the chief technological officer first, and then someone from a pretty known company, I think a gaming company afterwards. And then yesterday it was reinstated as CEO. And he felt like it's basically it's baby projects, and he felt like he was like he said that it was like he was watching his eulogy while still being alive. So it really felt like it was hurtful for him, and it was not his decision. So yeah, what do you feel, guys? Like aside from the facts, which we don't have a lot of, what do you feel is behind all of that?
Let me make this clear. So he was fired for miscommunication, then he was rehired but demoted.
No, I think is rehired as CEO.
As CEO, but his tasks were like not what he used to do.
No, I think it's completely reinstated.
Okay, completely reinstated.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes me feel like OpenAI does not know what they're doing. Like to make such a drastic choice, and then again another drastic choice to bring him in. So there's definitely something going on that, of course, I guess the story will tell.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
it definitely is weird.
yeah, but they were pressured by staff, basically. Like half of their staff threatened to go elsewhere. So like, yeah, and why were their staff so unhappy? And when I go into a feeling of ChatGPT, I only see him like, of course there is trial and error, right? But like the growth of the company was like, yeah. Usually it's like when you have such a big technological company, it's like when you have a soccer team or something, a full football team. Like if it's doing good, you probably don't want to change the direction. If it's doing bad, that's probably when you're asking to change the direction. But if it's doing good, you don't want to like upend everything. but and that's why, in this sense, that's maybe why it was weird. But I mean, we don't know what he wasn't communicating, but from what everyone, even like board members, said, feels like maybe it wasn't warranting such a drastic thing. So it's like kind of asking like what were the motives behind that as well. Like for people wanting to vie for money or power, because it feels like everyone is hinting at the fact that it's taking like power interests first, instead of like a good decision.
Yeah, I also feel like such a successful company that's going on right now has to do a lot of legwork with the team, and probably why they listened to the team in the first place, of so many people saying that he needed to get fired, because of course the team is their backbone. So they didn't want to maybe bring any riffs on that. Maybe his management was mismanaged. But of course, we don't know the clear story of this yet.
Right. Maybe they just, who knows why, because we just don't know. The feeling that I get from it though is that maybe the board felt like what Sam Altman was doing, like the vision that he was like holding, was basically like kind of maybe like steady progress and like keep doing what you're doing. And it's like been fine. In fact, it's been like really successful and it's been good. But maybe the board kind of like got high off the idea of like even greater, more explosive, crazy trajectory of growth. Maybe even they had more of like a short-term mindset. I don't know. It almost has the feeling of, it feels related to almost like a but I could be wrong about this because we don't have details, like a private equity firm where they like buy a company, usually a struggling company, but it can be any, I guess. And they buy a company, fire a bunch of people, strip everything out, make the company really profitable, but often worse for people and everyone involved, make it worse for everyone involved, and then resell it at a higher, it's like flipping houses, but like flipping a company just to extract value from it, because you're in the short term trying to like increase the profits that it can make. I'm not saying this is what was going on, but it has that same feeling of someone trying to be like opportunistic, but not necessarily like loving or ethical. Whereas keeping Sam Altman is like, yeah, you're just going to keep chugging along and everything, but like, isn't that fine? Isn't that great? Isn't that good enough? You know? And that's my feeling of it. But again, like, we don't really know. So yeah. Do you guys, I don't know, what do you feel about that?
Yeah, I feel like you touched on something. Maybe there is that feeling that it was a lesson, a human lesson of like, hey, we actually want stable, we don't want to get high. Much like the cycle of history. And yeah, but there's that feeling of like, I would even add that his firing would have been less dramatic and less mediatic if they were honest about the reason why he was fired, because it feels like there's a dishonesty reason behind that. And that dishonesty is making us feel that it was more for profit than for the actual vision of the thing. And I think it's pretty nice that the story settled down so quickly, and he will have a new board with him as a support system, which is very good. So now he's ensuring that his foundation is even stronger to continue to grow his baby projects. And there's this feeling of like his peace over the decision, although he expressed that it felt like not good. But his peace and the truth over the decision, like the staff decisions, he used to remain like pretty calm and say that it's going to like be employed elsewhere. I think it really helped, and it's really like a show that peace always wins in the end. I think it's pretty encouraging for people like us, in saying that, hey, the truth will always come out, always, always, always. And it feels nice that in a Silicon Valley that is getting like very like maybe stalling a little bit, there's just this peaceful growth, like not this fiery high that we've seen the past few years, but just like something that will make the economy of Silicon Valley stable again and good again, just by being itself. And yeah, huge positive human lesson from OpenAI and Sam Altman. Who knew, like an AI company teaching us about humanity? That feels really nice.
Yeah. I agree. Like, it feels a lot more grounded once that he came back, especially if he's for consistent growth, then that should be a plus sign for the whole company that this man should not leave or be fired. But of course, we don't know the full story of why he was fired, but he seems like his foundation is a lot more stable for him to come back. And the key point here is peace is always what we're looking for. And that is a great transition to our next story about Israel and Hamas and how they have a 4-day truce and how that may bring a lot of peace to both sides.
Yeah, I mean, it's better than anything. I think it will change a lot of things. First of all, we're going to free the hostages. That's something big, because the fact that the hostages are out of the way is going to remove a factor for which Israel was like pounding down so hard on Gaza. And yeah, we're going to see like after like aid is like coming in a more like consistent way, and hostages are not hostages anymore. It's going to make, I guess, the intentions of both sides clearer, and I think it's going to make this conflict clearer as well. And yeah, that was my feeling on it, because the hostages were like a really like big pain point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I feel the feeling I got from it was a lot of relief that there would be more of an opening for humanitarian aid now, or maybe for more of an opening for people leaving Gaza if they want to, or all of that and everything. Yeah. And yeah, I don't know. It felt really brutal what was going on and everything like that. And I don't know. Hopefully they can use this opportunity to open up some sort of like dialogue or take a different approach to all of this, or somehow change their approach to all of this. Like, it's a question in my mind there is still like, is there not like a more, as can we not learn like a more precise way to deal with this, like the problem and the threat of like Hamas and stuff that involves like, that doesn't involve like so much destruction and death, and that targets Hamas more specifically, and also find better ways to protect Israel from Hamas? Because I know Hamas, the whole thing was that they were finding ways to like, I guess, outsmart or get around Israel's air defense system, like the Iron Dome. And that was like a big issue. So that kind of prompted such a response to Gaza. So those were my feelings about it. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough about this subject though to say anything beyond what I just said. So yeah, please help enlighten our viewers.
I think it's good. I think it's good enough that you said what you said. It's already enough. My concern is like, what are we going to do with like the Palestinians that were hurt, the ones that need care, the ones that need medical assistance? Like, how are we going to move them in order to care for the situation and not have so much like damage and death toll beyond that 4-day truce? Then that is going to be a difficult question, and one that won't have a perfect solution if the truce is only 4 day. And two, the problem is to the answer about like how to handle Hamas better. The thing is that there are so many subgroups of Hamas and subcells of terrorist groups that there's actually no idea who exactly to target because we don't know who exactly did it and who exactly to stop. And that's something that I think is not talked enough in the media, that people don't know enough about, and that complicates the thing so much. But of course, like pounding down on Gaza for a month was absolutely brutal as well. And so yeah, I don't think there's a perfect solution here, but at least there's a truth, and that still brings that feeling of relief for everyone. Truly, like I think we can all feel it, you know.
Yeah, it does. It's also interesting too because connecting to the first topic we had, this Israel's history is doing the same thing, you know, as the US's history and everything, because Israel was, you know, founded at the end of like after World War II. And just when the US and boom was happening, right? And the European like Marshall Plan reconstruction was happening. And now at the same time, they're having their crisis too, and they have been having their crisis too. And I felt that was interesting to see. And yeah, and you see like different generations disagreements and just different people's, like it's not generational necessarily, but different generations perspectives on all this and everything. And I think that that's cool.
Yeah. I'm hoping this 4 days of silence really gives an opportunity for self-reflection on both sides on how they can really enjoy peace. They can really enjoy some peace and quiet and recognize that this is what is needed for the next generation, and the current generation is peace. And I really like that you brought up the turning point when it and reflected it to Israel. And yeah, this is like a crisis period for them, for both Palestine and Israel, and they need to recognize that they're not going to get anywhere unless they accept themselves and others. Like it can't just be peace for one and not for anyone else. That will again go into that high cycle of where they're getting all happy and like there's others that are not experiencing the same level of peace. So peace for one is not peace for all. Peace for all is peace. That's how I feel.
Yeah. I don't know if like 4 days are going to bring that level of self-reflection, but yeah, there was definitely a call to stop and try to look at another way, like whatever, I guess, whatever is happening, like whatever reasons, whatever your feelings on it, whatever the author, like the other countries' motives for calling for one side or the other are, there was definitely something where all of us needed to put back the human at the center, I guess. And that's a big thing tonight, I'm feeling. But like, there is something about like bringing the human at the center of it all again. And I think once we do that, even if we don't know how it's going to go, at least it's going to bring more stability and compassion to all of us. Like, just like pulling the human at the center of an AI company is making it stable. And they've learned their lesson about like not shifting for like higher and stable profits at the detriment of humans. And so obviously to a conflict that has been there for like 100 years, it's not going to be that simple. But I think there is really like some lessons for both sides to be had, in the sense that that conflict has come up to a head so much that we can't do anything else than trying to look at it in a different way now, at least for some people. And I hope that it can definitely help, for sure.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that into a deeper point of, while we're looking at the human in the center, we can bring the God into the center. We can bring the love and the peace into the center and keep going forward with that. Because with humans, we have so much distinction, so much affiliation. But when you put God in the center, there's really no identity, nothing that we could even grasp aside from the feeling of love, the feeling of peace and groundedness.
Yeah, beautiful. Any last words on that?
Yeah, and that like now, like with what we're doing, like in the Church of Union and yeah, with unionism, we can help bring about like the end of this, like the end of the like negative aspects of cycles that we're talking about. And having a boom and a high that kind of pushes the pain to the side, then having it come up again later, predictably, and hopefully, well, I'm not hopefully, like we all know that ultimately as we work toward peace in ourselves and then together we can eliminate that in the world, the craziness.
World peace. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but like
actual world
really,
peace.
right, not just like something you say in a high and you're like, and then forget about it. No.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to that, yeah, and on that note, we are at the end of our discussion. Thank you so much for being there and discussing this with me. Thank you to everyone that watched us live or is watching us on YouTube. And if you like our content and would like to see more, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And yeah, consider following us and helping us grow and share this with the world and anyone who needs to see this. So have a good day or night. Take care. Bye-bye.